So what we're going to do today is a 30 minutes or so, 45 minutes maximum webinar about accessibility in terms of going mobile, using mobile technologies. Two of us are going to be on the call. Myself, Mark Walker, Marketing Manager. The other is Robin Christopherson. Hi, Robin. Just check you're still
Hi
there.
there.
Hello.
Hi guys.
And we're going to be talking about accessibility. AbilityNet does a lot of work with around digital accessibility, and also we have a digital inclusion strategy called Mind the Digital Gap, and part of that is about raising awareness of accessibility across a range of different audiences. In particular, for us, talking to the people who design and develop and pay for digital content and digital devices, and so this session is aimed at helping to educate and raise awareness of what's going on around digital inclusion. We've got a chat box for any questions, and we will be taking questions at the end. But if you've got any questions as we go along, please do put them in. And I'll keep track of that as we go along and check that we've got your questions included at the end for Robin and myself. So, Robin, do you want to kick us off and get going talking to us about what mobile is? I've put the first slide up just to let you know I'm driving the presentation. Robin's talking to it, so every now and then you will hear him ask me to change slides. Right, off you go, Robin. I've got the first one up. It's all about mobile.
Thanks, Mark. So yeah, welcome everybody. Just in case people aren't aware, I'm a blind JAWS user myself. I've got my earbuds in, so hopefully you won't hear JAWS. But I will ask Mark to advance the slide each time. It just makes it simpler if we run it off the one machine. So the first slide we've got here is a range of different screen sizes, and I'm sure that everybody who's on the webinar is all too painfully aware of the challenges of creating for mobile. And if we just start with the screen sizes alone, we've got a range of, we've got a sample, cross-sectional sample of screen sizes here on mobiles and tablets, and you've obviously got many other devices that are mobile as well, including a bewildering array of very strange-looking hybrid devices that are kind of not tablets, they're not laptops, they're not netbooks, they're not ultrabooks, whatever they might be. So just designing for the screen size alone is enough of a challenge. And obviously there are CMSs out there that have good responsive design templates, SharePoint, WordPress, Squarespace, and they can be a good place to start. Obviously you don't need to start with a responsive template. You can create one according to the good practices, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But if your main concern or your main sort of mindset around designing for mobile is making sure that it looks good regardless of the myriad of different screen sizes, then unfortunately we're here to sort of tell you that there is so much more to it. The challenge goes beyond dealing with the proliferating screen sizes that are out there to thinking about some other really serious considerations. If we go on to the next slide.
Yes, done.
So not only are we talking about different screen sizes, mobile is much more about people accessing your content in a number of different environments. Some of them are really quite extreme environments, and we'll look at a few examples of those in a moment. But sitting at a desktop with a big screen, often sort of in a quiet room with a keyboard and mouse, is light years away from what we're talking about in accessing mobile content. And we're going to talk about some of the main issues, the main things to bear in mind when you're designing for this really quite varied and extreme set of different circumstances that people will be accessing the content. But we're first of all going to start off by hearing a short video clip from Matt May, who is an accessibility expert at the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium that deal with all things web. And he's going to be talking about how it's actually a win-win situation if you cater for people with different disabilities accessing content under these really quite extreme environments or situations. So over to Matt.
the idea of accessibility is to create a bridge between the problems that the people with disabilities have using technology, and in the mobile world, basically you have the same issue. Like your devices, whether it's a phone or a tablet or what have you, are all just a technological solution to problems that you encounter. And you run into the same kinds of issues that a person with disabilities may have, whether it's ambient noise in a room or bright sunlight or things like that, where contrast becomes an issue, or being able to hear to hear music over a background or whatever can be a problem. And these are things that you have to take into account. Now, in the mobile world, that's a convenience to the user. But what we've learned over decades of dealing with these issues in the field of accessibility is that the things that were needs for people are now wants for lots of other people. So we think about things like on-screen keyboard that was around in desktop operating systems since the 80s. Pinching and zooming, we've had screen magnifiers that long. Anything going back to like curb cuts in the pavement. They were designed for people that were using wheelchairs, and now you see more people in strollers using it. So if you look at it that way, and you see that you can solve people's problems by making things a little easier for them in their environment, that carries over to everyone, but it benefits people with disabilities most because you're integrating that problem, because you realize that if they can't do what they need to be doing, they're actually being blocked from something. So it's more than just a convenience. It's enabling someone to live a life on.
Right, there you go.
Matt was prematurely.
Yeah. So we're back on to the screen.
Great. So, thank you, Matt. Well, what he was talking about there was basically how important it is to consider about that inclusive design is. Do you want to get rid of that speech? Because
sorry, yes, I don't know what's causing it. That should stop. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So it's really important to consider the variety of different environments that people are going to be accessing your content. And when you do, you're not just catering for people with disabilities, you're actually catering for everybody. Or you could flip that around and say you're not just catering for a mainstream audience. You will get the disability or the disabled user in there sort of free. So talking about extreme environments, we're going to have a quick video, if we go on to the next slide, of what is arguably putting people in the most extreme environments where they are simultaneously accessing their mobile content. So this is Google Glass. Everybody's heard of Google Glass. It's got a lot of smarts in there. It's got a built-in camera, a lot of artificial intelligence. It's got a heads-up display. Now, you thought that you had a big enough of a challenge to design responsively for screen sizes right down to some of the really small smartphones, but there is so much activity around Google Glass and creating versions of your content, versions of your services for Glass, it's called Glassware, that you really will find yourself needing to consider how you're going to be delivering content onto these really quite small displays. Google Glass is just 360 by, I think, 280 pixels. So it's really very small, but not that different from, for example, smartwatches, which we're hearing a lot about, and there are quite a few models out at the moment. So there will be such a movement towards this level of mobility, this level of wearable technology, that you really will find yourself, if not today, then in the very near future, asking yourself, okay, well, does our mobile strategy include catering for these sort of extremely mobile devices as well? So let's just watch a quick video and see how really quite extreme the environments are that people are going to be consuming content and interacting with their smart devices.
Okay, Glass, record a video. This is it. We're on in 2 minutes.
Okay, Glass. Hang out with the Flying Club.
Google Photos Tiger Heads.
You ready? You ready?
Right there. Okay, Glass, take a picture.
That is awesome.
Okay, Glass, record a video!
First exit. Google. Stay delicious and Thai. Alright.
Google jellyfish.
Let's see. It's beautiful.
So even myself as a blind person is particularly excited about that level of intelligence, that level of mobile computing. Okay, I wouldn't be able to use the heads-up display, but as you could see from those clips, it has voice recognition, it has speech output, it can play music, it can tell you what delicious is in Thai. It's even clever enough to recognize that command when your mouth is full of sushi or whatever it was that he was eating. So your content needs to be conforming to the very best level of mobile, the best practices as set out by the W3C, which we'll look at in a moment, to be robust enough to handle those sort of environments. If we quickly go on to the next slide. So to kind of sum up with talking about extreme environments, we are all disabled at some time or another. Some of us are permanently disabled, other people are temporarily disabled. We've got a picture here of somebody using their phone in their car, which we all do from time to time. And for that duration of usage, or for that sort of use case, we are, to all intents and purposes, either motor impaired or visually impaired or both, because you really shouldn't be using your phone for any prolonged period in the standard way you do normally whilst driving. So that's why we have, you know, the Siri buttons on steering wheels. We have apps like Waze where you can wave in front of the camera to be able to report a traffic incident or whatever it might be. There are lots of different choices of ways to interact with mobile content, and of course the way that the content is delivered visually on a small screen that you only have 2 seconds to glance at is very important. So it is about presentation, but it's about so much more than that. It's about choices, being able to interact with the content in a variety of ways, whether it's by touch or by an external keyboard. You know, is the content keyboard accessible as well as touch enabled? You know, is voice recognition built in? If we're talking about apps, for example, are you offering them other choices about how to drive it? With iOS, for example, the ability to drive or control apps and the operating system by a single switch exists, for example, for people with very severe motor impairments like Professor Stephen Hawking, for example. So it's all about choices, a number of different input and output methodologies. Similarly, we've got a picture here of somebody jogging. You know, if you're jogging, then you might want to be able to control things using just the voice commands on the remote control of the earbuds, or you might want to just pull it out of your pocket very quickly and do a few things, in which case how lean and well thought out the content is for you to be able to access that content and functionality really very quickly before popping it back in your pocket and not running into a tree at the same time is really important. Similarly, on a bright sunny day, if you've got your phone out, you know, you're temporarily visually impaired because you can't see the screen because the sun's too bright, etc., etc. So if we move on, I talked about the mobile web best practices a moment ago. Here we've got a couple of screenshots of this. By the way, we'll send round after the webinar links to all the videos and the online resources that we're going to cover. So if you're feeling perplexed about wondering where these things are, don't worry, we'll email those around, including a link to this mobile web best practices, which is a W3C recommendation, set of guidelines. Quite logically, they are served up in a mobile-friendly version in the form of this W3C cheat sheet, as it's called. Here we can see some screenshots, and it has the different W3C requirements, including WCAG, in there so that you can click through, and it's all done in a very mobile-friendly way, so it's just the sort of key points and data that you can get and click through to sort of more in-depth detail as you go. And it includes in there a link to mobile, which is their mobile web best practices. So when you're delivering content via, you know, to the mobile user, there are obviously different choices. You can have web and you can go for apps. And if you're going for web, then this is where you need to look at the mobile web best practices. And it's all there with regards to telling you, you know, technical guidance and also sort of useful tips and testing techniques to be able to create content that is flexible, robust, fit for purpose, and hopefully will help you to be able to deliver content in a, you know, successfully to the sort of variety of different users and use case scenarios that we've just been looking at before. So bring it up on your phone, create a shortcut to it on your desktop or on your, you know, Springboard or whatever your home screen of your phone is, and then you can just, you know, bring that up and have your phone as a second screen for when you're creating your mobile masterpieces so that you can refer to it easily on your phone. Go to the next slide. So still looking, is that right?
Sorry, yes, I just had a technical problem there at my end. It's okay. You're on the right slide now.
Great. So staying with this technically accessible theme, and I'm going to talk in a moment about why being technically accessible isn't necessarily the full story or any kind of guarantee. But if you're looking at creating mobile content in the form of apps, then these are the guidelines to look at if you are developing on Android. So here's a screenshot of the web page that is the home of the Android guidelines on creating accessible apps for Android. When you're creating content for mobile, we've talked about how it really needs to be lean and it needs to be the sort of key bits of information and functionality. And many disabled people, for example, would often go to a mobile version of a normal website, even though they're accessing it from their desktop, for example, so m.facebook or ebay.co.uk/mobile, because it's a much more slim, cut down, and often more accessible experience, because you can't guarantee that all smartphones, all mobile devices will support Flash or Ajax or things like that. And the next level up, again, of simplicity is when you create an app, because apps tend to be very lean and very focused in the functionality that they offer. And we'll look at an app in a moment as an example of that. If we go on to the next slide. iOS is probably the pinnacle, the ultimate example of inclusive design, in as much as the OS itself is very, very accessible. There's so many accessibility features built into iOS. And for developers, if you follow the guidelines that we've got a screen grab of here, then you get accessibility free of charge. You the SDK, the software developer kit, all the controls in there, all the UI elements are accessible if you just use them out of the box. You actually have to break accessibility by creating your own custom controls, etc., or not following the guidelines to create an inaccessible iOS app. So apps are very important from a inclusion point of view, and often people just create an app to deliver a subset of even what they were delivering on, in their mobile website. And in a moment, Mark will be talking about a particular example of that, for example, two-factor authentication, to be able to deliver just one single bit of functionality to their customers. And apps are often extremely focused, and for me, they're the go-to choice for me, because even the mobile version of a website can be too sort of time-consuming for someone who needs to rely on speech output, for example, to get through. But the apps are always so quick and so easy when they're accessible that's my choice anytime. On the next slide, so talked about technical accessibility. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will have real life an inclusive product in real life if you have just followed the guidelines. Many times we see websites or mobile sites or mobile apps that are technically accessible. They've been written to the guidelines, coded to the guidelines, but because they haven't been tested, they haven't been tried out to see if they are accessible in real life or inclusive in real life, then close but no cigar, basically. So you can't guarantee a knockout app or mobile website if you don't test, and that's what Mark's going to go on to talk about now. Over the next couple of slides, he's going to be diving into, in a little bit more detail, the kind of services that AbilityNet offers that can help assure real-life accessibility, not just technical compliance. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Robin. Really, rather than listing our services and it feeling like a bit of a sales pitch, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what's changed in our end, and because I think it's interesting to reflect on what our clients are asking us to do. There are clients on the call as well, so you'll know that there's a shift going on. Talking to the guys who work in the usability labs about the testing that they're doing. At least 30% of the testing that we're booking now is non-desktop, and that figure is rising quite quickly. A couple of years ago, we did almost nothing that wasn't on the desktop. We're very quickly putting tests through on phones and tablets, and I'll come to in a minute. I'll come to talking about the future, where I think we're going to be looking at other devices as well. There are a couple of areas that stand out when I was talking to the person who's handling the current client list. Retrospective testing of websites and apps to see how they work on a mobile, to see whether they're accessible, where they're already existing, and doing retrospective testing. But a lot more work where new projects are being taken up and new functionalities being added. And Robin mentioned that on an app, it's very common that it has a very single function, but there's somebody may have an idea of adding in another single function and having 2 or 3 different things that they want to run on the same app. And we might get involved at that point in doing testing to make sure they're all going to work together and be as accessible as possible. Another effect for us is that we now have to have more and more devices in the office ready for testing. In particular, when looking at Android, which is obviously the fastest growing sort of take up at the moment of platforms, which works differently on different devices. And just recently, we had an app that we were testing for a major name, and it only works on a Samsung S series handset, or only works on the Android version that runs on that, and otherwise it would need to be modified. So there's also a challenge for us in terms of keeping track of the different technologies and the different combinations of operating systems and devices, and that will be, I'm sure, only grow in significance for us and equally for you as as the people who are designing to try and reach different people on different platforms. That equally you'll need to take account of that as well. And then the final thing is we're getting more testers. We've got a good range of disabled users who that's what we've always had, is a network of people. But we're trying to broaden so that we've got people who are much more familiar with trying to use a tablet, whatever their age, whatever their disability. The take-up of tablets amongst older people, I think, is growing faster than any other age range because of the ease of use from their perception. So we're looking again at the mix of testers that we have and the skills and experience they have, because we're moving away from the desktop, which was a little bit more homogenous in terms of how we could approach the testing. So hopefully that'll give you an idea of what our customers are asking us to do, and how we're having to respond. A couple of examples of typical projects. And most of our work is done under NDA, so I'm not going to give any names and details, but I think you can get an idea from some of the examples. Working across platforms, testing in iOS and Android and Windows 8 and OS 10. And equally on OS 10, different sized devices, and then iOS, not assuming that will just translate across, and looking at the difference on an iPod, on an iPhone and an iPad, for example. Really getting down to a little bit of detail there about how these different apps or websites will perform on different devices. Looking at specific features, Robin's mentioned it a couple of times, but it's worth emphasizing that the websites and apps are very different things, and they will be designed in a very different way. Putting user journeys and standard sort of UX processes in for an app is probably a little bit more straightforward because they're sort of single function, or maybe thinking about single user doing one particular sort of set of transactions with you. But websites are sort of headed that way, becoming simpler and easier to use because they're focused on those single things you want people to do. And then a final bit was that we're not seeing that people are doing more testing and therefore budgets are going up. It's the mix of testing which I think is changing, and so there's no additional overhead necessarily. It's just that you're having to think a little bit more broadly about the sorts of products and devices and services that you're developing before getting too far into the process. And we've always advocated people coming to us early on in the process. Accessibility isn't a bolt-on. It's much harder to put things right at the end than it is to sort of test it at the beginning. And that's becoming increasingly true. And as projects become more complex, you've really got to build this in from the beginning. Otherwise, you're going to be finding things out at the end that you really don't want to know about what does and doesn't work on particular platforms. So the cost can remain the same, but we're trying to push our customers into using these sort of best practice at the beginning of projects, rather than bolting it on the end. That will become more critical, as I say. Final bit from me, just looking ahead, I picked up on a couple of examples of things which aren't apps and aren't websites. And we've been talking about this again with my colleagues about what we think we're going to be doing in a couple of years' time. I've got a picture there of the device I have to use to log in to our intranet remotely. And it has a little number that flashes up, and you have to put the number into your sort of two-tier authentication process when you log on online. Those sorts of devices, which are increasingly common, there is actually an app which is a counterpart to that little device. We don't have any licenses. I think we have 3 or 4. I know Robin's got one because he couldn't use the device. But the people creating those devices and the people using them within the process are clearly going to have to think about accessibility and how to make it work successfully. Remote controls for devices, we've probably already got between us, most of us, 5 or 6 different remote controls lying around the house. Those are the sorts of devices that are becoming smarter and having screens put into them. And again, there will be accessibility issues there. We've seen lots of devices. The Galaxy S4, which I haven't used, has some gesture controls. And we'll see gestures, I think, becoming more common. They may feel a little bit gimmicky, but Minority Report type interfaces may become more popular. TVs are going to be having apps, or they have apps already. There's lots of media coming in through your TV. The TV is obviously vying to be the sort of single screen in the in the living room with a bunch of smaller screens on your lap. And again, accessibility will need to be thought through in terms of the capabilities of those TVs versus the capability of a phone or a tablet. And then finally, just another example that we think we're going to be seeing is testing on how you can use a Wii or a PlayStation to access content. And already there's a significant amount of internet surfing going on amongst sort of the right age range you'd expect, sort of 15 to 25, is surfing online, checking stuff like their email through their games machines. And Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo are bringing devices out that encourage that. And I think someone told me the DSi has Opera browser on it, for example. So these are going to be devices that people are using in the future to get online and access your services. So they're going to be devices that we're going to have to be using for testing, and that you're going to have to be thinking about in terms of accessibility at the beginning rather than at the end. So that's a quick roundup of where we're at with our services, just to give you a glimpse of how things are changing for us. And then back over to you, Robin. You're going to talk, I think, about some of the quick wins that people can take now, and some top tips about where to start.
Great. So thanks very much. Is it the Wimbledon next?
It is, yeah.
So Mark is quite jealous because he has to carry that dongle thing around for two-factor authentication to get into our intranet, and I can use the mobile app, which only people in the organisation who can't see that dongle are allowed to use. So I feel quite pleased about that. And thankfully the app is accessible, because if it wasn't, then I would be stuck on 2 counts there. And we're going to just have a quick example of an app. This is a very topical one that we're going to look at in a second, the Wimbledon app, that you can check for accessibility using, for example, VoiceOver built into every iOS device. So Mark mentioned before about how we do testing, and it's the only way to really ensure accessibility. Obviously not just with a screen reader, but we're probably the most difficult customers to cater for. And we'll look at an example of that now. Mark's going to switch over to of the Wimbledon app, very topical this week.
It might be a bit quiet, sorry, I'm just trying to
with
adjust
VoiceOver running, and I've changed it to the British English voice. I prefer the Australian lady normally, but I think he's a bit clearer probably. And I've slowed the speech right down for you guys. So let's bring up the Wimbledon app.
Wimbledon.
Okay.
Double tap to open.
So this is a recording I did earlier. Nothing to see, you're just listening to what I hear. So here we are on the front page of the Wimbledon app that you guys can see on the screen already. I'm at the top of the first page, which is news, and it told me a news heading. And if I flick to the right,
header logo IBM button.
Header logo IBM. That's an unlabeled sponsor link, I think, which we'll come back to later. If I go to the bottom of the screen, there are usually tabs across the bottom of different apps.
Selected news tab 1 of 5.
So it said selected news tab 1 of 5, and if I flick to the right,
Live scores tab 2
live
of 5.
scores 2 of 5,
Results tab 3 of 5.
results,
Order of play tab 4 of 5.
order of play,
More tab 5 of 5.
and more. But the main page, the main part of this page, is taken up with a whole bunch of news items. But unfortunately, even though with iOS, by default, everything is nice and accessible, and you actually have to mess things up to make them inaccessible, they seem to have done this for the news items. So if I go back up to the top of the page again,
News heading.
So news heading. So if I start to go an item at a time through the screen here by flicking to the right, you can sequentially go down through everything on the page. We'll hit the IBM logo again.
Header logo IBM button.
And if I flick to the right again,
Title abstract.
title abstract, and again,
Title abstract.
and again,
Title abstract.
and again,
Title 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 Title.
I'm just
Abstract.
flicking and flicking. So these are all inaccessible title abstract items. If I tap on one
News. Back button.
and now start going through,
Header logo IBM.
you always get the IBM logo.
Share your shot off day to win center court tickets. Heading left. Tuesday the 25th of June 2013. The tennis whites shot of the day. Image.
So, and you've got a nice labeled image there. So you're now reading the news item. So that's accessible. It's just the abstract on the sort of main news title page that isn't. I'll go back.
News. Heading.
So let's go to, say,
Results. Tab. 3 of 5.
results. And here you can see, or rather,
Results.
you can't see, but I can hear. So now it says results heading at the top.
Header logo IBM.
And there's our good old IBM logo. And if I flick again,
Selected. Gentlemen singles.
gentlemen's singles,
Ladies singles.
ladies singles,
Gentlemen's doubles.
gentlemen's doubles. Let's go back to gentlemen's singles
Selected. Gentlemen's single.
and go in there.
Results. Back button. Header logo IBM. Tuesday the 25th of June 2013.
25th of June.
Select day button. Button.
Select day. Now I could double tap on that and select a different day. I guess I can't go forwards. I can only go backwards.
M. Djokovic. 1. F. Mayer. Gentlemen singles. First round. Center court. 6, 7, 3, 5, 3, 0, 6, 4.
So there was 4 sets there. Djokovic beat Mayer in 4 sets.
D. Ferrer. 4. M. Allen. Gentlemen singles. First round. Center court. 6, 4, 7, 1, 6, 5, 3, 1, 6, 2.
Took more sets there. And it tells you the court number and that sort of thing. So that's all very accessible. That's great. I'll finish off this quick demo by going up into the top right corner and clicking on that IBM logo.
Header logo IBM. Button.
So if I double tap on that, then there's a screenshot on the slide which shows this now opened. So
Header logo IBM.
so I've opened that. Now visually it's in the middle of the screen, but for me, if I roam my finger around the middle of the screen,
M. Djokovic. 1. F. N. D. Ferrer. 4. A. Ramos. J.
So-
Del Potro. 8.
I'll just hash it up there. That advert is completely inaccessible to me. So top tip, guys, as well as not breaking the accessibility of different controls and things when you're creating your mobile app, please, if you're going to be reliant on ad revenue, or if you don't want to make your sponsors unhappy, then make sure that the ads are themselves accessible as well. So I can't tell that that has opened up at all, and so hence I'm not going to be able to learn about what IBM has to offer. So that's a very quick demo of using VoiceOver on the Wimbledon app. Great, thank you, Me. So as I mentioned before, there are so many ways that people are accessing content. Okay, for blind users who rely on VoiceOver or speech output, we are going to be disadvantaged by that, but you really must get out of the mindset of thinking that only people with disabilities are going to be disadvantaged if you don't sort of follow mobile web best practices or inclusive design when it comes to delivery of your mobile content. There are going to be lots of people who are interacting with it in a number of different ways, and to have stuff spoken back is becoming more and more convenient for people, as well as being absolutely essential for someone like myself. Don't think about disability, don't think about sectors of society, think about everybody accessing things in a variety of different ways and all being sort of temporarily disabled from time to time and needing to have choice. So if we go on to the next slide. This is by no means a recommendation of ours as being your core to your sort of mobile strategy, but if you're struggling with having content that is mobile ready, you've just got a main version of your site that isn't lean enough, isn't responsive enough to cater for the mobile audience as well, then as a stopgap measure, there's a good article here about creating a mobile landing page. It's not a new idea. It's been around ever since mobile has been around, and it's just basically a way of creating a mobile version of your homepage that is auto-detected when people access it through mobile browsers, and it serves up content which you consider being optimal or kind of key bits of information or functionality. So if you're a restaurant, for example, what your mobile page would have on it is your logo, the address of your restaurant, a link to the menu, and contact details about how to get in contact with you, that sort of thing. And then obviously there'd be a link through to the main site as well, which isn't as friendly, but it's a really easy way of catering for the lack of mobile friendliness on your main site, and catering for people that are going to be accessing it sort of tomorrow on mobile through mobile devices. And by the way, we should probably point out that a couple of weeks ago, access to websites from mobile platforms is actually greater than from desktop. I think it's about 54%. So mobile is actually now the default way that people will be accessing your content. So we're wrapping up now. We're going to have some questions and answers. I think Mark's going to man the chat box, the chat room, and we'll just wrap up. So we'll have a few minutes questions, and then we'll just have some wrapping up afterwards. Over to you, Mark.
Sorry, just unmuting myself there. Can you hear me, Robin?
Yep.
Robin, can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Sorry, I'm just checking because I'm muted and unmuted, and you're the only person I know who can ask to check whether you can hear me. Okay, you mentioned making a mobile friendly page, and I've just put up a screen there. We had a couple of ideas about where you could look for that. So I've got some questions. I'm just going to read a couple to you, Robin, and there's a few different things about testing. The first thing to say is we are recording this, and we will be sharing the video after the event. So, and we'll also be circulating links to the various resources, and we'll be posting that as a blog post on our website. So, in terms of recording things, there's plenty of opportunity to catch up on what we're doing. A question here. First off, Robin, how much do you include users with disabilities in the design process? And what services do we offer to developers in that sense? And I think another question that goes with it is how much do you need to build that in at the beginning? You know, what does it look like when you're building it in? How do you do it? Rather than testing at the end, which may be where people are more familiar. So how do you include disabled people in the design process?
Well, that's a fantastic question. We all know about personas. Personas are sample people, illustrative of your stakeholders, of your audience. And the problem is that most often, or 99% of the time, these personas, they're diverse in other demographics, but not in impairments and disability and dyslexia and things like that. So we would strongly recommend that, as well as kind of broadening your perspective to think about designing for everybody by default and not just thinking about accessibility as a bolt-on exercise, as Mark mentioned earlier, also use these personas as a basis to design against. And AbilityNet have got a set of personas that are much more diverse than the average personas that are out there that people use. So you can start right at the beginning in the concept stage in having bearing in mind much more diverse personas than you otherwise normally would. But then you can also build in accessibility right from square one, from the wireframe stage, design mock-ups. There are things in the guidelines. You could turn to AbilityNet if you wished to get input on what accessibility, what inclusive design looks like right throughout the process. And that doesn't, you know, it's not a heavy input process to be able to make sure that your project is steering in the right direction and not building in inaccessibility or exclusion as you go through. And then as you get to the sort of UAT stage, the user acceptance testing that everybody does, we would strongly advise that you get disabled users involved as well. So it's really only at the end that you need to get actual users involved on a formal basis. Before then, the diverse personas and the ability to use these free tools like VoiceOver, for example, that's built into every iOS device. There's a free screen reader that you can download for PCs called NVDA, which is really good in the common browsers, accesses all elements of HTML5 and ARIA, which is a way that you can layer on further accessibility. So there are lots of free tools out there. There's really no excuse to test as you go along and to think about a really diverse set of users by default.
Okay, thanks, Robin. I'm just checking. The person who asked that question, just saying, just as follow up, I meant actual users, such as you would with non-disabled users. I think you're saying that you would involve disabled people at an early stage as is relevant for the project. I think that's what you're saying, rather than the testing, which is a slightly different part of the process. So you would get them involved in terms of talking to your customers as you would with anybody when you're doing sort of user-centered design.
Yeah, I mean, we get asked by different clients to, for example, form focus groups, and
Right.
the focus groups would have a look at the design concepts, discuss the general approach to the project, and make and provide input really very early on. But if you can garner the feedback or the input from your disabled employees, if you have them, there are various special interest groups that are usually impairment related in your local area, etc. If you don't want to, for example, come to AbilityNet to recruit and set up focus groups. But yes, the earlier the better, the more inclusive, the representative set of people's feedback that you get is, the better, really.
Okay,
And it
great.
kind of comes onto the slide that we're going to talk about in a moment, so we will revisit this point in a sec.
Well, I'm going to keep us moving because we've got a few minutes left. There's a question here which you've touched on, but it needs a little bit more detail. Besides VoiceOver, what other tools that we can use? What other tools are there that we can use to validate WCAG? Since in desktop web version we have either the Wave toolbar or Wave website for the initial validation. Is there something similar for mobile? Is there some obvious tool that we can use apart from just turning on VoiceOver?
So just to touch the desktop first, Wave, there are other tools available. They're good, but they're certainly not the be-all and end-all of compliance, even technical checking, checking for technical compliance against the guidelines. Test from the keyboard, put your mouse behind your monitor or unplug it and put it in a drawer, and make sure that all your functionality works from the keyboard. Use NVDA. We'll include a link to NVDA in the information that we send around. Check that the text resizes, that sort of thing. There are some really good tips for testing, and they're included in the testing techniques of the WCAG guidelines. And then moving over to mobile, yes, there's obviously VoiceOver on iOS. There's also magnification built into iOS called Zoom. In Android, there's equivalents as well. Depending on the version of Android that you've got, TalkBack may or may not be installed by default. That's the VoiceOver. That's the screen reader for Android. Behaves slightly differently from VoiceOver. You really do need to test with a range of different handsets, and we'd be happy to kind of provide people a steer on which devices. I mean, we've, as Mark mentioned before, gone through that decision process in the recent months when we've been increasingly delivering mobile testing.
Could you also, Robin, just mention what the VoiceOver equivalent is in Android? How that would work?
Yeah, that's TalkBack, as I mentioned a second ago.
Okay, sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. I thought that's what you did. I wasn't sure.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
So yes, TalkBack is available through the Play Store if it's not installed already, and it's free.
Right. So that may be installed on some devices. There's a final question here I'm going to pick up is, when you say testing, do you mean task-based usability testing with users or testing for technical accessibility? And I'm just going to pick up on another bit that says, why are technical accessible solutions not real life accessible? I'm just going to suggest to combine the fact that talking about the difference between real life accessibility and technical accessibility, just to emphasize what you meant by that.
Sure thing. So I can't remember the first half of the question now.
just about the join up between user-based testing,
Oh, sorry.
task-based testing, and
basically, if you are, as a developer or somebody involved in the development of the project, testing with the tools that a disabled person would use, then that's very, very valuable. It's also quite dangerous if you aren't familiar enough with the functionality of that particular assistive technology, because you won't know then whether what you're experiencing, when you come across an issue, whether it's an issue with the way that you've created the content, or whether it's the limitation of the assistive technology, or whether it's your lack of knowledge of the functionality or the way to use the assistive technology. And so that can be, there is a bit of a learning curve. On mobile, the screen readers, for example, like VoiceOver, are actually far less complicated than on the desktop. So, test with, if you're going to do screen reader testing, one could argue that if you test using VoiceOver in iOS and TalkBack in Android, then you pretty much have the desktop screen reading requirement covered as well, because they're very similar in what they do. It's just that it's all gesture based rather than having to learn 150 keystrokes for doing it with NVDA or JAWS on the desktop. You're just roaming your finger around the screen and tapping on things. So that's quite a good tip, really. But yes, there is a difference between using the assistive technologies yourself, and we do offer that service. We call it expert assistive technology testing, expert AT testing, and it's something that is quicker and cheaper to do than getting disabled users involved, and we can do that earlier on in the dev process. But there's no replacement for getting actual bona fide end users involved, because they pick up on so much more from a usability point of view as well as from an accessibility point of view. And the slide that we'll look at in a moment will kind of summarize what I mean by that.
Yeah. Okay, I think the other part of the question, which I didn't explain very well, was that we see task-based testing as sort of central to what we're doing. We're not, we're giving users tasks to perform, and then recording how well they can do them, how easily they can do them, and their feedback about it. So it's task-based testing at the core of what we're doing anyway. We happen to be working primarily with disabled people to do the testing, but it's the task. The task is the thing that we're actually trying to make sure that they can perform.
Absolutely.
Just one other. I'm going to do one final one. Is there a more? Are all the tools used to read out text so robotic, or are there more natural speaking tools available or in development? That's from someone who found it difficult to understand the computer. The voiceover that you were using. Is that typical?
Well, I mean, that's actually light years better than it used to be.
Right.
It's probably just the quality of the recording. If you have an iPhone, for example, and you ask Siri something, then she can speak it back, and it's very good quality. There are a range of different voices, synthesizers out there, and some of them do sound extremely human. What you do tend to find, though, is if you're actually a user of speech, as your primary sort of output methodology, you don't care a fig what it sounds like, because it doesn't even register. You're just listening to it. You're just using your phone or your computer, etc. And as long as it's clear, then that's fine. But for anyone that is waiting for iOS 7, which comes out in 2 or 3 months, the voice for Siri, which is also the voice for VoiceOver, which we heard a moment ago, those voices are infinitely better. They're using the Nuance Vocalizer Expressive. If you just Google Nuance Vocalizer Expressive, vocalizer with a Z because it's American, you will be blown away at the quality of those voices that they've got samples of. So yes, they will be becoming much more human-like in the not too distant future.
Okay. I'm going to wrap up. There's somebody asking about other disabilities, that VoiceOver is great, but the physical impairments need other assistive technologies. Just to emphasise that where Robin's been taking a lead in the particular example, and one of the reasons we did it the way we did was to try and show how simple it could be for you to do a test like that. Of course, there's lots of other testing and lots of other disabilities, and some guidelines delve more deeply than others into those other issues. So the guidelines is one place to go, and then obviously we can provide advice and support around particular issues, around a particular physical disability, for example, or other impairment. Okay, so
Those
Robin, I'm going to give you your final thing you were asking for, the final slide, disabled user testing slide.
So just to quickly touch on that last point, those three resources, the Android iOS developer guidelines and the mobile web best practices, are pan disability. They're not just vision.
Yeah.
And everything that AbilityNet is about is pan disability as well. So absolutely, yes, there are other disabilities are available. So just to sum up, we talked about disabled user testing and how it really is important to ensure real life accessibility. Technical compliance is one thing, but we have often done testing on sites that are AA. They've put in a lot of effort to get to be accessible, but there are a number of reasons why disabled people still couldn't complete the tasks successfully, around information architecture, things not being placed consistently, that sort of thing. There are a lot of more qualitative issues that aren't captured by the technical guidelines that do come out in disabled user testing. And there is a very significant overlap between mainstream user testing, usability testing, and disabled user testing. And we would argue that if you really only have a budget for one set of user testing, that you might want to consider just going for disabled user testing, because you really do get sort of two for the price of one. Our disabled users are also users in their own right, and the users that have Parkinson's disease, for example, the only thing that is non-standard about them is the fact that they have fine motor control difficulties. Everything else, all the other responses that they give you, are going to be the same as you would get with normal usability testing. People with dyslexia, they have an issue with reading from the screen, but everything else about them will be normal responses. And it's the same for all the other disabilities as well. They're normal people, they just happen to have an issue in one area. So you really do get very comprehensive results. So if you do want to consider going for disabled user testing, you might find that you actually don't need to go for standard usability testing as you otherwise would have. So just sort of wrapping up on that point there, and I think Mark's just going to do a bit of housekeeping, and I'll say thank you very much indeed for bearing with us and our technical difficulties at points, and hopefully you'll join us again for next month's webinar.
Thanks, Robin. The only housekeeping is to say thank you very much for coming. We've had over 60 people here today, which is great. We'll be doing another one next month. Keep your eye open for that. We've got all the details when you registered. We will be sending around notes, and a copy of the recording and so on will be made available. So if you do want that, then that'll be out by the end of the week, I think. Yeah, thank you very much for coming, and do let us know if there's other topics you want us to cover in the future. When we send you a note about feedback, please do tell us if there's other stuff you want to cover. If there's things we didn't go into enough detail today, we'd like to know more about. Thank you very much. Have a good day.